Okay, so back here with part 2 of the Steve Clark in the Round solo tutorial. If you've not seen part 1, I recommend checking out first. I'll put a link in the description to it. But basically part 2 here is going to look at all the stuff that's edited out of the home release of the In the Round concert. On the Hysteria tour, Steve's solo actually extends beyond what's shown on the DVD video release. Now to learn this stuff, I basically looked at a few bootlegs, and I reluctantly looked at a video which had a naked Rick Allen in it, but I won't talk too much about that. So I'll link those videos as well in the description. There's a couple of variations here and there, but I think this is the main chunk of what you'd do. So like before, I'm going to go through each line. I'll maybe play each line at like the normal pace, go through it, play it at a slow pace as well, just so you can hear the context of what I'm trying to do. So let's just dive straight into it here. Line 1 should sound something like this. So like the first half of the solo, we're still centered around this D chord. But on this half, it kind of adds this extra note here on the high E string, which kind of gives it a little bit of a brighter sound. So the way I'd finger this opening D chord, you got your open D string, first finger on the second of the G, second finger on the third of the B, and then try and bring your pinky in for this this fifth of the high E. If that's too much trouble for you, what you can maybe do to kind of get the same sound, and if you're not quite up to speed just yet, maybe just play the 3 and the 5, and you could play like this, first finger and third finger. And you just play the chord like that instead of everything. Okay. Now whatever shape you're going to do, we're going to take that chord shape, and we're going to move it up 3 frets. Now like everything, when you're sliding up, you always want to keep an eye on your destination. That's going to help you from not overshooting or undershooting the slide. Now, I've not quite written how many times you play each chord. You maybe hear it on the bootlegs itself, but you kind of want to go for this kind of thing here. So you're sliding up to that second chord and then striking again before sliding out. And I think Steve might dive bomb out with the whammy bar, but you could just slide out if you don't have one. Another thing which I noticed I was just doing there, when I'm picking that chord, because I like to highlight the high E string, I'm doing an upstroke there. Okay. Now this next little lick, it can be kind of tricky, but slowed down, it should be basically something like this. So we just take those notes there. So from the 3 of the high E ending on the open of the G. Now, the way I like to do this part here, basically, when you kind of look at something like this, it's kind of hard when you see it tabbed out to kind of imagine where your fingers are supposed to go. But sometimes it's best to try and think about the context of the piece, and it kind of helps you think about how you should be playing it, if there's no video source anyway. So because we're kind of centered around a D chord shape, I just play a finger like a D chord, and then I use my pinky for that kind of 3-2-3 hammer-on pull-off thing. And then in the next part, it's almost like you're playing a C major chord. So that's the way I kind of think about this next fingering position. So third fret of the high E, I'm going to use my 4th finger, my pinky. I'm going to hit the 2nd of the high E, which is fretted with my 2nd finger. And then the little arcing line above means to play it in a legato style, so smoothly. And translated in guitar terms, this means we use hammer-ons and pull-offs. We do not pick every note, we just pick the first one. So again, if your pinky's not really up to playing like a hammer-on pull-off just yet, you can substitute for any fingers you think will be comfortable there. But like I say, to kind of get a comfortable position here, I like to fret it like I'm doing a D chord. Then we move off to this next part, the open half of the high E. I like to bring my first finger in for the first fret of the B. Then we've got the open of the G. And then when I land on this next note, third of the A string, I'm going to use my third finger because it's almost like I'm fretting a C major chord. Okay, so that's the kind of logic behind that finger in there. So that lick should be something like this. Then we end on that D chord again. This is last little bit of the bar. These are natural harmonics again, similar to what we saw in part 1. Of course, the best way to play a harmonic, take the fret you're on, lightly rest your finger on the string and move it as close to the fret wire above the fret as possible. This gives you the cleanest sounding harmonic. So we're playing 5 and 7 off the G, 7 off the D, and then a little double stop chord, 7 off the D and G. So I'm going to play that line at moderate pace. We'll see what it sounds like. Okay, now at the end of the bar, I've got a line with 2 dots. This basically means we're just going to repeat this bar. He does the same lick twice, and the only kind of variations I would hear would be just on what he chooses to play the harmonic wise at the end. But he usually plays this kind of pattern, you know. So if we move to line 2, it goes into this kind of pull-off pattern, which I think sounds like this. I'll play the full line together. In fact, let me play line 1 as well to get me into the groove of it a little bit. So it should be like this. Okay, so line 2. Now before, when I tabbed out this solo, I just thought he was doing this kind of thing, pulling off from the 4th of the G open and then the 4th of the D open, like so. But I think listening to it again, I think he goes down to the 2nd fret of the G like I've tabbed out now, so it's something like. Okay, now the best way to finger this, you want to use your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the G string. We're going to pull off, and when we pull off, it's like a downward motion, pull on the string. Then pulling off from the 2nd fret of the G to the open, again a downward motion. Then we move to the 4th fret of the D and pull off, so. Now to kind of get this up to speed, it's the old kind of saying of just try and build up slowly, and just try and work on strengthening your fingers. You might find doing a lot of pull-offs like this in a quick succession, you might get a bit of fatigue in your fingers, but not to worry about that. You know, that kind of stuff builds up over time. Another thing to point out while I'm using pull-offs here and we're using open strings, is to think about your muting technique. Now when I'm playing this, my palm is doing most of the muting here, I believe. So I've got my palm resting on the bottom 2 strings. I got my pinky resting on the high E string. So that means when I'm playing just the D and G strings, they're mostly the things that are going to be ringing out. The flesh of my 1st finger is muting the B string. So that means I can just play this without worrying too much about other strings ringing out. Okay, so let's play this line slowly then. Oh, one thing to point out, I've written this sequence out as like he goes through it 4 times, you know, like he does that 4 times. A couple of videos he does it 4 times. One video does it like 6 times. I think it's just more of like a feel thing. So don't worry too much about how many of this like little sequence you're doing. Yeah, let's play the full line at a moderate pace. Again, the last two kind of parts we've seen before, just the D chord and then harmonics on the 7th. But a slow pace should be something like this. Move on to line 3. We're kind of doing the similar chord shapes that we saw in 1. Doing something a little bit different. In fact, line 3 goes on to line 4 as well. So I'll play through the whole thing as Steve would play it, and we'll hear what it sounds like. It should be something like this. Okay, so if we just look at the chord parts here, again, want to finger them as we did before. But this time, for the first part, we're sliding up 2 frets, then back down, so like this. Now, the way I'm picking that, let me play it and think about it. Okay, so I'm sliding up, then I'm picking, sliding down, pick again. Like I said before, when I'm playing this stuff, I kind of like to upstroke it to make the higher strings ring out. And again, I guess you could substitute in, if you're not comfortable using your pinky, just substitute in with the high E and B strings. Next slide is a bigger slide, so we're going from going up 5 frets. Okay, then after that, the last part of line 3, we kind of have this little hammer-on pull-off pattern. The way I like to finger that, first finger should be covering the 7th frets. Use my second finger for the 8th fret. Move on to line 4. We're sliding down 2 frets. And the way I like to finger this part, first finger should be covering the 4th fret, second finger on the 5th. So doing 5, 4, 5, then we have the hammer on pull off 4, 5, 4 to open. Then 5 open on the D. So everything up till there should be like this. Then the last part, again, we're looking at that kind of C chord arpeggio, but I don't fret this like I did before. I just fret this with my middle finger for the 3rd fret of the A string. And then I finger that chord as I did at the start of line 3 for that little arpeggio there. Okay, so I'll play the whole line at a moderate pace. Should be like this. Okay, now again, lines 3 and 4, the start and end of the bar has the 2 dots. You play this lick twice. Again, there's no noticeable variations that Steve would do when he plays it a second time round. Okay, line 5 is what he'd end it on, which is a cool little shift in tonality. I talked at the end of the first video about how he goes in like an Ionian and Mixolydian tonalities with the D chord. Here he kind of goes even further outside. There might be a specific phrase for this, I'm not quite sure of it. The way I talk about this is if he's doing like it's like you're going in D Aeolian, but when you get to the D Aeolian's a minor key, but when you get to the actual D chord you make it a major again. So it kind of gives you this kind of uplifting progression, and you end it on a major instead of a minor. In fact, I'll just quickly highlight it. So instead of doing, I was about to play the major there. He plays like this. You know? Just gives it a different tonality there, which is cool. So he arpeggiates these chords like this, and this might be tricky to do because I use my pinky here, but it should be something like this. I'll go in a clean tone so you can hear it more clearly. So you start off with that open A, and then I'll come on with my first finger on that first fret of the A. I use my second finger for the second fret of the G, and I use my pinky for the third fret of the B string. So when you're trying to play it like that and let it all ring out on a clean tone, it's kind of hard to do, to get it clean. But because we're on a kind of distorted setting, if you're good with your timing, you can kind of move your fingers about to kind of not have to rely too much on the clean ringing of every note. You know? So after I've played that first fret and I'm hitting the open D, I can lift off of that first fret of the B, of the A, sorry. You know, if you get the timing right and make it seamless, it shouldn't give you that much bother. Then we have the next chord, which how do I do it? Yeah. You can't really finger this one. Well, you could do it, it's not as comfortable. But basically, the way I finger this, second finger on the third fret of the A. First finger on the second of the G, and then I bring my middle finger in again for the third of the B, and then I use my pinky for the fifth of the high E. So again, it's all about moving your fingers in a timely fashion to make sure there's no noticeable gaps in there. Of course, with the effects and that Steve was using, with the delay in that and the kind of pedal notes, these kind of things wouldn't be as noticeable. But it's just something to be wary of. So all that line together at a slow pace, something like this. So that's pretty much the solo, the rest of the solo of how Steve would do it. And now underneath, I've put these intro chords. Now, a couple of times you'd start off with these chords. It basically sounds like this. And then you go into... but I noticed on the In the Round bootleg, he actually doesn't start with those chords. So you can add them in if you want. Right, so what I'll do now is I'll try and play through it all the way Steve would. Just so you can hear it all in the context of what it should sound like. I'll add my delay pedal in as well, just in case you hear anything that sounds a bit different. But it should be something like this. Okay, so it should sound something like that. I hope this lesson has helped out. I forgot to mention at the start, but you can get the tab on my Facebook page, and I'll put a link in the description where you can download it. Maybe at some point I'll do a cover of me doing parts 1 and 2 together. We'll see about that. But until then, catch you next time.